Thank you for tuning in to another episode of InRange. This is going to be another in the field strip series, and today we're going to field strip this FS2000. I used to have an FS2000 and I really liked it. Honestly, I used it for years in competition and really had an affinity for it, and for some silly reason, I don't know why, I sold it. This is well before InRange was ever a thing. And when it comes to bullpups, there really only are three that ever I've used that I actually thought really had merit. The FAMAS, which of course is complete unobtainium, the current Desertec MDR, which I actually like quite a bit, in spite of its weight, it's a great gun, and the FS2000. And when people ask me, do you ever regret selling any guns, I'm going to say that I regret selling the FS2000 because they stopped manufacturing, importing, whatever these into the United States, and they are now becoming collectibles, really. Their value is skyrocketing, and they're somewhat difficult to obtain. I would like to thank one of my longtime two-gun action challenge match shooters and Patreon supporters for loaning me this gun to do this video today. So the FS2000, or the F2000, is a very unique design. It came out in the year 2000, that's why it's called the FS or the F2000, and was targeted to be a military rifle. It saw very little military adaptation, and then it was brought to the civilian market as the FS2000 in a semi-automatic format, and also saw very little adaptation. I think part of that is because it's a bullpup, but another part of it is that it's a very unusual design that has a lot of kind of Swiss mechanics inside, even though it's Belgian, to eject the spent cases out the front, this making it a truly 100% ambidextrous bullpup. And while the trigger is a little spongy, the reality is, as complex as this gun is, I found mine to be extremely reliable. So what we're going to do is going to take this apart and go through how it works and field strip it, and hopefully you'll have an appreciation for what is probably one of the best bullpups ever fielded, in spite of the fact that it really saw very limited adaptation. So one of the first things you do with the field stripping any gun is you make sure that it's clear and empty. Now, one of the challenges with a bullpup is that it's hard to see into the action, and we've seen that with some of the bullpups we've profiled here on InRangeTV. But first let me talk about the actual magazine well and the magazine itself. The FS2000 was designed to only accept Stanag aluminum and steel magazines. You can't use PMags in this or anything like that, and it was also designed to not drop free. It actually encourages mag retention. A couple of reasons for that. One, there's a rubber gasket in here which is used to seal the mag well for the ingress of dirt and debris, or if you stick a foul mag in there, hopefully it should keep dirt out of the action. And as a result, that made it impossible to really fit anything other than a standard Stanag magazine. But to extract the magazine, you actually push in on this button and then pull the magazine out, fighting the gasket. Same thing for seating it, you have to really set it home. But you pull it in, pull it out. That causes magazine retention, which is arguably a tactical good thing. To see into the action of this bullpup, which some bullpups are better than others in this regard, you open up what I call the toilet seat cover, and then you open it up. And you can lock it HK style, back, like that, but it does not have a standard bolt hold open on an empty mag, so that's one deficiency in the design. But you can then look into the action and visually identify that the gun is clear, and we now confirm that we have an empty FS2000. So you can close the toilet bowl lid, and of course, send that home. At that point, you know that the hammer on the fire control group is cocked, and the hammer has to be cocked for you to be able to remove it from the action for cleaning. To get to the fire control group, you pull up on this rubber pad in the back, pull this off. Then, just like the P90, this comes out as a complete unit. It's entirely polymer, the hammer's polymer, well, almost entirely polymer, and the hammer itself is polymer, the disconnector is polymer, and the only metal in here is really some springs and some steel guide rods. All you do with this is wipe it down, you don't disassemble this beyond that. So I'm going to set that to the side. But we've now pulled the fire control group out. So now let's get to the actual guts of this gun. There's a cross bolt here that you push and then pull across. Once you've done that, the upper and lower will separate apart. The upper we'll get to later. But we now have the lower, and all you do is pull on this transfer rod, and bam, the entire guts and heart of the system is now out of the gun. This lower is nothing more than a polymer shell, and you don't really do anything with this except set it to the side. So here we have a really weird bolt carrier group bolt system. This is your gas transfer rod, or your piston is ahead of that in the upper, which we'll get into later, but this is your transfer rod, and it's also your recoil spring, all built into one unit. And then that, of course, transfers to the bolt carrier group, which we have right here. And we have this weird polymer thingamajig right here, which is a lifter. This is used to take the extracted spent case and then shove it into the chute for the forward eject of the gun. This sounds really Rube Goldberg, it looks really Rube Goldberg, but in my experience it actually works reliably, which is quite astonishing. So let's go ahead and take down and field strip the guts here. The first thing we do is we pull up on the rear plunger, and that allows us to remove the firing pin. The firing pin has a captured spring on it, which is fine. This little lifting assembly here is actually an out-of-battery device. This does not allow the firing pin to go forward and fire the cartridge unless the bolt is fully in battery. It's a good idea, and it's also what guides part of the cam pin here, but the reality is it makes it a little more difficult to take the actual assembly apart. You kind of have to use 3 hands. So what we're going to do is we're going to lift this up and then push the bolt all the way back, at which point you'll see that the cam pin is now exposed. We're going to turn the cam pin so it's easier to get out, and if we're lucky, it'll come out easily. Boom. All right, we got the cam pin, and with that lifter or out-of-battery device still depressed, we can now pull the bolt out. This is as field stripped as you really ever need to take the bolt carrier group down. You can take this lifter assembly off, but you don't need to, and I would advise you not to. It's polymer, and how you were to take that off is you push this spring down or bring the spring down against tension, and when you get the spring down enough, this will lower itself and you can pull this polymer lifter off. The problem is putting polymer lifter back on. If you slip with this spring or just don't have it quite aligned, you will actually break the arm right here. I did this on my FS2000 once, I can tell you from experience, and your gun is out of commission because this is an essential part of your ejection system. I would advise not taking this off and just wiping it down with a rag. There's no need to take it off. But at this point, of course, you can clean the bolt. Anything else you need to do, you can clean the bolt carrier group, and then you can put it back together. So let's go ahead through that process in reverse. This is challenging with these parts still on here. You kind of need 3 hands. So you go ahead and put the bolt back in with the extractor at the top, and you need to push this back while lifting this out of the way and keeping the lifter out of the way as well, so that you can index the hole in the bolt for the cam pin, and that's just got to be just right. And if you get it just right, you can drop that cam pin right in, and then you turn the cam pin 90 degrees and let the bolt go forward, and that lines everything back up. At that point, you can just put the firing pin in, and you are done with anything you would ever need to do with the bolt carrier group assembly. And we will set that to the side. The gas system, as I said, is in the upper assembly, and this is the gas system here. It has 2 settings, standard and adverse, and this is a very similar, if not the exact same gas system you'll see on the SCAR series of rifles later. But by depressing the little spring-loaded plunger here, you can turn the plug out of the threads and take the plunger out, or excuse me, the plug. And if you use a cleaning rod, you can push down here and you can push the gas piston out of this to clean it. I don't have that with me right now, not a big deal, and it's just a little simple gas piston with some gas rings on it. But to put the plug back in, start with the bottom, turn, push this plunger in, and that's all there is to the gas system. But let's go ahead and go back to reassembly. So, for reassembly, we take the lower, for reassembly we take the lower, and we take this entire bolt carrier group and the little polymer lugs that are on that lifter, line up to some grooves in the polymer lower. And once they get there, they're just there. And once they line up, you should be able to just seat everything back into the gun. There it goes. And then, bam, that goes right back into the system. At that point, you just take the upper, you line it up on these there, and then you got to make sure that the transfer rod is aligned with the hole, which goes around and under, and then you seat this. Once you've seated it all the way, you should be able to push the cross bolt. Sometimes it takes a little. There it goes. And at that point, you have completely put that back together. Now you take your fire control group, drop it in the rear, and then you have to put the plate back on. And voila, we now have a completely put back together FS2000. And we are good to go. So I think you can see that part of the reason that this gun wasn't adopted is that it's a very unorthodox design. And as I said earlier, I have found it to be very reliable on the clock, and I really liked the gun. But the reality is, putting this in front of anyone and saying, this is how you field strip this, it ejects out the front, and if anything goes wrong with it, you really can't do anything for malfunction clearance. You can get to it from in here, which doesn't give you a lot of access, and if something really goes wrong, you have to move that cross bolt apart and take the upper and lower apart in the field. That is not the best of malfunction clearance drills. I think that, aligned with the unorthodox design, made it something that wasn't well accepted in military circles, and then additionally was not well accepted and adopted into civilian circles either. Guys, if you like this kind of content, please consider supporting us on Patreon. It is you, the viewer, that keeps InRange alive. We are funded by only Patreon, only viewer support, no sponsors, no advertising, only you, the viewer. If you already are one, thank you. If you would like to be, please consider it. If you can't be, I totally understand. Just subscribe to one of our multiple distribution networks. You can find them all at InRange.tv. Share with your friends, and thanks for watching.